Greetings, Warlords. Welcome back to Warhammer 40,000 Conquest, the card game, played on Iridial.net. Today we have another match on the Traxxas sector, with the Apocalypse in effect. Today we have a match between two Necrons Warlords, with me playing Illuminor Szeras and my opponent playing Etekh the Awakener. So as we are both Necrons, we can both take common units from other factions on the alignment wheel. In other words, any units which aren't Tyranids and loyal. Now we'll see that since I'm Illuminor Szeras and my ability allows me to gain 1 resource whenever I heal damage from a Necron's army unit, I'm probably not going to be running too many of these outside faction cards, and it's mostly just going to be a mono Necrons deck. Meanwhile, for my opponent, Etekh the Awakener, he has an ability which allows him to have all of his army units gain 1 trait for the rest of the round. So that's pretty interesting. It allows him to do a few neat things with, say, Space Wolves in order to use the Bloodclaw pack to put a different unit into play. A lot of neat things you can do with that. And so he's probably going to be running a lot more of these outside Necrons cards. So it'll be interesting to see which is better. Well, not strictly better, but which comes out on top in this matchup. The mono Necrons deck or the Necrons deck with some outside faction cards. Of immediate note here is that all 5 currently face-up planets have a red icon, so therefore this game is going to go until Atrox Prime, the 5th planet at the latest. And now we can discuss our opening hand. So in this case I have a pretty terrible hand here. There are no command units, no cost reduction, very little in the way of healing aside from 1 reanimation protocol and a Royal Phylactery. But the Royal Phylactery is only good if I can actually damage one of my units, which I can't. I could try to damage Triax Stalker's possession, but it's a vehicle, so it has the no war gear attachments keyword, and therefore it can't have a Royal Phylactery. So I'd have to damage a Lich Guard or something, and that's very expensive for playing turn 1. So I'm easily going to mulligan this hand. And my mulligan is rewarded as I now have a much better hand. I have 2 Parasitic Scarabs, so I'm pretty sorted in the way of cost reduction, and they're also pretty decent command units, as well as some units that I can deal damage to in the form of my signature unit, as well as Canoptic Spiders, which can then heal units which I control, but I have to discard a card from my hand in order to do that. So we both needed to pick our enslaved faction, and we both picked Eldar. I just picked Eldar because I don't care. I'm not running any non-Necron units in my deck. And he probably then has a bunch of Eldar units in his hand. Maybe some Eldar Survivalists, some Saintman Kinsmans, that sort of thing. But we'll have to wait and see. Meanwhile, he opens up with a Sortek Complex while I open up with a Parasitic Scarabs. And of course then I'm going to play another Parasitic Scarabs. So we're both building up our economies. And now he plays for Hollow Sun. So this is his signature support, and when deploying a non-Necrons unit, if he controls no units of that faction, he can ignore the enslavement dial. So this will allow him to trigger Sortek Complex multiple times in 1 turn very easily. And if he gets more Sortek Complexes, then he can get even more value out of his Hollow Sun, as he can keep triggering all of those Sortek Complexes, as long as he keeps playing units from different factions. Of course, this requires him to then have units of those different factions. So it's going to get very difficult for him to keep playing different factions when he keeps playing more and more of his units, since once he's played 1 Eldar card, if he plays more Eldar cards, they're not going to give him any benefit from his Sortek Complexes. In the meantime, I play out a Canoptic Spider to a 1st planet, and he plays out a Goth Boys to the first planet, which prompts me to respond with my signature unit to the first planet. So I've got 2 damage units for the first planet, but one of them's a Canoptic Spider, which has a huge amount of attack, and the other one's got a lot of damage on it, which I'll be able to heal later on. Hopefully, though, I'll draw a card such as a Royal Phylactery, which allows me to heal over time. Although, unfortunately, I ended up discarding a Royal Phylactery with my Parasitic Scarabs, so that's a little sad, but what can you do? Now he plays out a Slith Mercenary to the Atrox Prime, which trumps my command there. And I am forced to pass. He ends up playing out some more command units, with an Incubus Warrior trumping my command at Karnov, so that's a shame as well. I'm probably going to need to send my Ward there. And then he plays an Eldar Survivalist to Taurus. So that's pretty bad. He's going to get a lot of money out of that Eldar Survivalist. And it looks like he might even be able to trigger Taurus's battle ability to get the extra cards or resources. So, Warlord commitments. We're both pretty sure about where the other player's going to go. He's probably going to go to Taurus, so I can't snipe his command at Taurus. And I'm going to go to Karnov just to try and get rid of his Incubus Warrior, and then maybe trigger a useful battle ability. From the command struggle, I end up drawing an Eldritch Lance, my signature attachment, so that's going to be very helpful. That will allow me to keep healing my units in order to keep making some money each round. And I do have quite a lot of damage units right now, of all of my army units being damaged, so it's not like there's a lack of units in order for me to use it on. Meanwhile, combat begins at the first planet, so here I'm just going to attack my Canoptic Spiders into the Goth Boys and pretty easily kill that unit. It's not really much of a threat here. Now I get to heal one of my units with Iridior's battle ability. So I could heal a Parasitic Scarab in order to get more cheapened deployments on the next couple rounds. However, I only have 1 unit in my hand, and I also sort of want to use the units in my hand for Canoptic Spider healing, so I actually decide to heal my signature unit, just because it's a decent combat unit, and if I need to, I can heal the Canoptic Spider later on with its ability anyway. My opponent wins the battle at Taurus, and they have 4 units to my 5 units, so they do get to trigger the battle ability, and they choose to draw 3 cards, which makes sense, as they want to try to hunt down as many Sortek complexes as they can, as well as many different units of different factions as they can. Battle at Karnov now, so I attack first against the Incubus Warrior, for only 1 attack though, and he decides to shield it with an Eldritch Reaping. And then he attacks my Parasitic Scarabs, killing it, so I'm not going to be able to use that card for any more discounts. So that's a shame. We come to the end of the combat round, and he decides to retreat his Incubus Warrior, as he doesn't want to spend any more shields on it. And now I have a choice on what battle ability to use. I could use Atrox Prime in order to attack both his Incubus Warrior and Etekh the Awakener for 1 damage. Although he's probably just going to shield for 1 damage on the Incubus Warrior, so it might not really be worth it. I can't trigger Taurus, so that's out of the question. And I could trigger Ivan to put my 1 Canoptic Spider into play, although he might have a better unit than I do, such as a Doomsday Arc. So it's a bit of a risk, but I do decide to trigger Ivan. And Ivan's the most fun one anyway, it's just fun to get a free unit. And he puts an Immortal Vanguard into his HQ. So that's actually a pretty good unit for the HQ, since it doesn't really need to contribute its stats at all. It just needs to be there, and it'll give +1 attack and +1 health to each non-Necron warrior unit he controls. And Etekh can give any of his units the warrior trait, just by deciding to do so. So pretty helpful there. Next deploy phase now, and he decides to enslave the Astromilitarum, which suggests that he has more, or at least multiple Astromilitarum units he wants to play. So we'll have to see what those are. In particular, Standard Bearer is one which comes to mind, which would allow him to ambush of a card into play and then ready another unit he controls, which could be a lot of damage. While I've been yapping, my opponent has played another Sortek complex, so whenever he plays a new faction, he's going to get 2 cards or 2 resources, or 1 card and 1 resource. So that's a huge discount on those. I played out my Eldritch Lance, and he played out a Fire Warrior Grenadiers. So this is a unit where for every ethereal unit you control of the same planet, it gets +2 attack and +1 command icon. So if Etekh gives the ethereal trait to all of his army units, then this could be swinging for a huge amount of damage, as well as having a huge number of command icons. Very scary unit indeed. Meanwhile, I've played out an Immortal Legions to Balus, which seems like a very expensive way to try to get the cards from Balus. However, it's because all of the other planets do not have any, well, they have 1 card maximum of rewards on them, which isn't much because in this case, as I'm playing Xeras, I want to try to draw as many cards as possible in order to then take advantage of Xeras's innate money-generating abilities. The unit is going to be stuck there, but there's not really anything I can do about that. Now my opponent is loading up on Taurus with 2 more Rattling Deadeyes and a Convoking Praetorian. Convoking Praetorian allows him to change his enslavement dial after it enters play. So he could do that if he wants to, and he decides yes, he does want to, and he enslaves the Dark Eldar. This lets him put another Dark Eldar unit into play, which now he's got 3 range units there, 2 Rattling Deadeyes and a Sybarite Marksman, so that's quite a lot of range damage. He's going to find it very easy to win Taurus. And then he uses Etekh the Awakener to give all of his units the Ethereal trait. So his Fire Warrior Grenadiers are packing a huge punch now. So we come to the command phase now, and you have to choose where to go. So I've got a lot of units in my HQ, so I ideally would want them to be as close to the combat as possible, so Carnif seems like a good choice here. It also has the Carnif battle ability, so I can trigger the battle ability of any of the other planets, which would hopefully be very helpful here. And that's basically my only choice actually. I'm not really sure why I'm presenting this like there's another option. It could be interesting to talk about where he goes, although was probably not relevant to our choice here, as regardless of where he goes, we just want to go to Carnif in any case. So we'll just wait and see. He ends up committing to Carnif as well, so that's pretty good for me. I'll be able to try and kill some of his units before they are able to deal significant damage to me. And we come to the combat phase. In this case, he just easily wins Taurus without being able to trigger its battle ability, so that's all. We move on to the battle at Carnif, and it is his first turn to swing. Before he does though, I do use my Eldritch Lance to heal 1 damage from one of my units, just to get the money out of it. He attacks my Canoptic Spider. I don't really want that to die, so I do decide to shield it with a Resurrection Orb. I attack his Warlord just to try and get some damage on it, and we come to the end of the combat round. So now he needs to choose whether or not to stay or retreat, and he does decide to retreat all of his units. So I win the battle, and now I get to choose whether to trigger Ivan, Atrox Prime, or Barlas. So I could trigger Ivan, however, I'm probably just going to play the Lich Guard Sentinel in my hand normally, so I decided to trigger Atrox Prime targeting his HQ in order to deal a huge amount of damage. And now we are in the next deploy round. So we have a pretty good setup on Carnif here, so we're probably going to win that without too much difficulty. So now we need to try and think about which planet we want to win next, either Ivan or Atrox Prime. So it's probably going to be Atrox Prime because he's probably going to send his next squad of units to Ivan in order to prevent me from winning there. But before we do any of that, I decide to use a reanimation protocol to heal my parasitic scarabs, just to get some money out of it and be able to use its ability a few more times. I play out another parasitic scarabs in order to get more money out of them, and my opponent plays out an expendable pawn and a Warriors of Gidgem. So Warriors of Gidgem is trumping my command at Ferrin, while the expendable pawn is just a generically good unit which can sacrifice itself to prevent damage. And I decide that I am going to make Atrox Prime my victory condition, so I deploy my Lich Guard Sentinel to Atrox Prime, and discount its cost by 2 with all the parasitic scarabs. And my opponent plays out another Fire Warrior Grenadiers to Atrox Prime, so that's probably going to easily destroy my Lich Guard Sentinel in one hit. So that's going to be pretty rough for me, but it should be fine if I can just rebuild my forces long enough for the Fire Warrior Grenadiers to be killed afterwards. Now I play a Resurrection Orb onto my Lich Guard Sentinel. Now, while there currently isn't a unit in my discard that I can actually put into play with Resurrection Orb, I will be able to use Canoptic Spiders to discard a unit in my hand. So I'm going to try to draw a card which I can use to then discard that card and put the unit into play with the Resurrection Orb. This will then let me trigger my optimized protocols, although unfortunately I haven't actually seen a single card that I can play with optimized protocols yet, despite them being in the deck. I've got a few parasitic scarabs, but they're not a particularly good target. Meanwhile, my opponent decides to use Etekh the Awakener to give all of his units the Ethereal trait, so I'll make his 5 Warrior Grenadiers very powerful. I pass, of course, seeing as I'm out of units. And my opponent plays a Convoking Praetorians, followed by an Eldar Survivalist to Atrox Prime, which shows he fully intends to try to beat me at Atrox Prime. Committing units now. So here, I can either go to Atrox Prime, or I can basically do nothing, as going to Ferrin will get me 2 resources, but I'm pretty set on resources already. I don't really need to go to Barlas, and he's definitely not going to go to Barlas because he has 2 units in his HQ. And Ivan's a bit pointless because killing 1 expendable pawn is not that big of a gain. So I may as well just go to Atrox. He commits to Ivan just so as I can't try to put any more units into play there and win the battle earlier than Atrox Prime. Makes sense. We now have combat begins. So I have drawn 2 units that I could put into my discard with Canoptic Spiders. One being a Canoptic Spider, the other one being a Flayed-One Revenants. So here, the Flayed-One Revenants, when it enters play, as an additional cost, it has to either discard 2 cards from my hand, or I spend 2 resources to mill the top 8 cards of my deck. So here I'm very interested in milling the top 8 cards of my deck, as that would maybe give me another card that I could play with Optimized Protocol. So that's what I decided to do here. Now I resolve a battle ability, so it's pretty easy for me to just pick Carnif or Atrox Prime here, because then I get to shoot at Ivan with Atrox Prime and kill most of his units. Not much to think about here. Now we have a battle with Ivan, and he does decide to trigger the battle ability. In this case, he puts out a Doom Scythe Invader to his HQ, which is pretty good, and I put out a Canoptic Spider. Now my Resurrection Orb triggers from the battle at Atrox Prime, and I put the Flayed One's Revenants into play. And as an additional cost, I have to discard the top 8 cards of my deck, and also pay 2 resources. So we do that and we see what we get. And we get some truly disgusting hits. So we have hit 3 Triarch Stalker's possessions. And since I have 3 optimized protocols, this means that I can put all of them into play at Atrox Prime. So that's just frankly obscene. This is the Triarch Stalkers are 4/6 units, which would normally, when you deploy them, you would give your opponent 2 cards. But because this is entering play and not a deploy, that effect is bypassed. We do not have to give our opponent 2 cards. So it's pretty disgusting. I've just gained 12 attack and 18 health for basically nothing. And now I'm going to win the game because there's nothing my opponent could possibly do to defeat 3 Triarch Stalkers. So we both make some attacks, but his are pretty meaningless, so you have to go into the Lich Guard, which do basically nothing, and mine are just cleaning out his units. After that I get to trigger Atrox Prime, which kills even more of his units on Ivan, so I could probably even win the battle with Ivan if I wanted to, since he has to save his cards in order to win Atrox, but he can't win Atrox, it's impossible. I did accidentally pass my combat turn, which caused auto ready, but it doesn't really make a difference here. And now we'll just speed through this because there's no decisions to make anymore, as I'm just going to win the game with 3 Triarch Stalker possessions. He gives up at this point anyway, since yes, there's absolutely nothing he can do, so he just lets me win on Ivan to end the game faster. So it was generally a pretty good game, although at the end there I basically just I wasn't quite lucked out because eventually I was going to mill my entire deck at some point, just due to the sheer amount of Parasitic Scarabs and other Flayed One's Revenants I might have played. It's more of a Triarch Stalker's Possession is a far too powerful card for its cost, with a restriction that is extremely easy to play around. And Optimized Protocol is also a card that is far too good at what it does, which lets me generate far too much value for the opponent to deal with. Thank you, Triarch Stalker's Possession. Very cool, very fair and balanced. That'll be it for this video. A bit of a disappointing end to that one, but they can't all be winners. Sometimes you print overpowered cards, and then the cards are overpowered, and ruin the game. But that's what happens sometimes. Admittedly, if he'd had a Doomsday Arc which didn't have the Apocalypse, then he probably still actually could have beaten me, because he would have been able to get out a bunch of different factions and then kill most of my units. Well, not really kill, because I'll play a mechanical enhancement to give +2 health to all of my units, and then he could at most use a Doomsday Arc to deal 7 damage to all of my units, which would then get some of it removed by Vivisection for even more healing. So it probably wouldn't really make that much of a difference here. Regardless, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.